Good morning. The first item of business is general questions, and at question number 1 I call Colin Beattie.
To ask the Scottish Government what its position is on relaxing any conservation area restrictions that prevent the installation of solar panels and other energy-saving initiatives.
Minister Alistair Allen.
In May last year, the Scottish Government amended permitted development rights to allow solar panels and replacement windows to be installed on domestic and non-domestic buildings in conservation areas without the need for a planning application. This was an important change which strikes an appropriate balance between tackling climate change and protecting important historic buildings and townscapes. These rights are subject to specific restrictions, such as allowing solar panels to the rear of buildings in conservation areas.
Colin Beattie.
I am regularly contacted by my constituents who are understandably frustrated as these restrictions mean they are unable to install solar panels. Can the Minister advise what support the Scottish Government has in place to help my constituents in conservation areas contribute to our journey to net zero?
Minister.
I should say that even in those circumstances where proposals for solar are not covered by the generous permitted development rights I've mentioned, it is still an option for people to apply for permission for the installation of solar panels. That's a matter for the Planning Authority, and such applications will be considered taking account and weighing up what is very supportive renewable energy policy in the National Planning Framework 4, alongside policy relating to heritage objectives and any other relevant considerations.
Paul Sweeney.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The recent change in permitted development rights has actually led to a significant degradation in the country's built environment, particularly in conservation areas, due to the loose nature of the regulation, meaning that PVC windows can be installed, for example, which actually have poor through life cycle performance compared to timber. Would the Minister consider, therefore, having more codified guidance for conservation areas to ensure that people are making the right decisions with the best informed practical information based on best practice across the country? And that could actually encourage the unit cost of installations such as sash and case windows that are timber to come down in price, because more people will be encouraged to buy that.
Minister.
I thank the member for his point. I know he's very interested in the built heritage. On the point about windows, I should say that the permitted development right for the alteration or replacement of windows in domestic or non-domestic buildings relates in conservation areas primarily to the front elevation of properties continuing to be restricted in most areas. There are different rules for listed buildings as well. However, as I say, there is a degree of authority for local authorities when they are approached by people in these situations too.
Question number 2, Carol Mockin.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government when it last discussed plans to reduce corridor care and the use of temporary escalation spaces with NHS boards.
Cabinet Secretary Neil Gray.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Health boards operate their own escalation policy for the management of inpatient capacity. This includes well-established processes with locally agreed trigger points for maintaining a safe service and ensuring patient safety. Capacity challenges can necessitate the provision of care in non-standard areas for some patients. This decision is not taken lightly and is made to relieve pressure in other parts of the system, in particular to prevent ambulance stacking and allow crews to respond promptly to the most serious incidents. Every effort will be made to accommodate patients in an inpatient ward, and we are working with boards to free up capacity in acute sites.
Thank you. I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. RCN's Corridor Care report revealed some harrowing truths about the current realities of NHS patient care. The pressure of overcrowding have forced staff to care for patients in areas which are unsafe and inappropriate. Corridor care compromises patient privacy and dignity, and it should not be accepted as the norm. To show the Scottish Government recognises that staff across health and social care are at breaking point, I ask the Cabinet Secretary today to commit to publishing regular data on corridor care.
Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you. I thank Carol Mockin for a question and recognise the pressure that has been on staff. I also recognise and thank the RCN for its report. The report was obviously a snapshot taken during the peak of flu demand over the Christmas period, when we have an exceptional level of flu prevalence. But I also recognise that those staff members who took part in that will also have felt pressure before that as well, and outside of that flu period. And of course we recognise that there is a link between patient safety and capacity, and so these are incredibly important questions, and one that we continue to work with boards. And the importance of the passage of this budget is so that the measures that we're taking to reduce demand upon the system and to free capacity are able to be taken forward.
Gulhani.
Thank you. Declaration of interest as a practising NHS GP. As one nurse explained in the harrowing RCN report, in a department with capacity for 13 beds, we had 40 in, with patients on chairs having treatments administered, also sitting in the waiting room on cardiac monitors, using privacy screens to put around patients to use the bedpan. Cabinet Secretary, imagine the indignity. The First Minister told journalists that multiple crises are facing too many parts of our NHS. The First Minister was pressed about these parts but refused to answer. So can the Cabinet Secretary now be straight with us and tell us which parts of the NHS are in crisis?
Cabinet Secretary.
So I absolutely recognise the points that Sandesh Gulhani makes. I also, as I did with Carol Mochan, reflect on the fact that the period in question we're talking about was at the peak of the winter flu spike, where we saw the highest level of flu incidence to when, I believe, records began in 2010. So we're talking about a period of exceptional demand. I also recognise the picture that has been portrayed by Mr Gulhani around the indignity that patients in situations such as that are suffering, and that is why the passage of our budget is going to be so important, to ensure that we're able to relieve pressure, we're able to increase capacity and ensure better flow through our hospitals, so our patients and our staff are able to get a better service, because for too many people they're waiting too long or are being treated in inappropriate places.
Thank you. Question number 3, Paul O'Kane.
To ask the Scottish Government whether it will provide an update on its stated commitment to end charges for non-residential care by the end of the current parliamentary session.
Minister Marie Todd.
The Scottish Government continues to work with COSLA to identify options for the removal of non-residential care charges as part of wider work with partners on social care improvement.
Paul O'Kane.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Well, with less than 18 months of parliamentary time to run, it sounds to me like this is another SNP promise made in their manifesto that will not be met. And broken promises have consequences, particularly for people in many local authorities now across Scotland who are looking at having to introduce care charges for the first time for people with physical and learning disabilities. This also sits at the back of a litany of promises which were made to disabled people: access to a Changing Places toilet fund, annual health checks for people who have learning disabilities, ELDAN bill, the Human Rights Bill and the ditched National Care Service. And now today we learn of £20 million wasted or unaccounted for from the Community Living Change Fund. So can I ask the Minister, when will her and our Government finally deliver on this pledge to end these charges and rectify a long list of broken promises to Scotland's disabled community?
Minister.
The Scottish Government and our partners remain absolutely committed to reviewing non-residential charges as part of the broader reform of social care. I've heard directly from disabled groups and vulnerable individuals across Scotland about the significant impact these charges have on their lives, and I have directed my officials to continue working with COSLA and with local partners to explore any possible options to achieve this objective, considering the current economic climate. I recognise the member's interest and advocacy in this area, but I think it's quite rich for a member of the Labour Party to lecture me on broken promises.
Question number 4, Willie Coffey.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government how it protects the environment and the interests of local communities regarding the construction of battery storage plants within rural settings.
Mr Alistair Allen.
Scotland's national planning framework ensures potential impacts of developments in communities and nature are important considerations in decision-making. All applications are subject to site-specific assessments. Are you having problems with the microphone?
Carry on speaking just now, Minister.
Okay. Details on the consenting process are set out in the Electricity Applications for Consent Regulations 1990 and the Electricity Works Environmental Impact Assessment Scotland Regulations 2017. That is a UK law applicable in Scotland. Developments under 50 megawatts are determined by planning authorities in accordance with the Town and Country Planning Development Management Procedures Regulations 2013. We are considering recent advice and modelling published by NESO, along with the measures in the UK Government's Clean Power Action Plan to inform our approach.
Willie Coffey.
Can I thank the Minister for that answer? We know that the consenting process for these battery storage plants falls within the UK Government's planning process under their Electricity Act, and which is totally inadequate. What concerns me is the lack of local consultation that takes place, the poor management of the installation of these facilities, and the significant damage caused to the rural environment. Can the Minister please give me an assurance that the Scottish Government will act on these concerns and make sure that local communities feel that they are valued and that the place in which they live is protected and enhanced for generations to come?
Minister.
On the point I think the member made about maintenance, and I don't know if this alludes to the question of safety, that when the Fire and Rescue Service in Scotland are informed about these applications, they do input into the process. In terms of some of the wider questions the member raises about the benefit to Scotland, the benefit to the community, despite the powers to mandate community benefits being reserved to the UK Government, Scotland has made progress through our voluntary good practice principles framework, and these encourage developers to offer community benefits as standard on all renewable energy projects. We are currently undertaking a joint review and consultation on the Scottish Government's good practice principles for onshore and offshore energy developments, which will consider our approach to community benefits from battery storage.
Question number 5, Karen Adam.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government whether feasibility studies and development expenditure for ports and harbours will be eligible for funding as part of the investment in maintaining and improving ports and harbours that is proposed in its draft budget 25-26.
Cabinet Secretary Fiona Hislop.
Within the ferries budget for 2025-26, £80 million has been forecast for piers and harbours to support and enhance ports across the Clyde and Hebrides and Northern Isles ferry services. This includes committed projects, new works, early design and business case development. CMAL lead delivery on this and also work with third-party port owners where investment is required to support new vessels and other network improvements. For ports out with the Lifeline ferry network, other routes to funding are available, and I am aware, for example, of ongoing dialogue between Scottish Enterprise and Fraserburgh Harbour around the port's master plan and other economic opportunities.
Karen Adam.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. Fraserburgh Harbour has ambitious plans to develop its infrastructure and be the first port of call supporting vital Scottish industries, especially offshore wind and our fishing fleet. However, Fraserburgh Harbour must also fund at risk its necessary development and feasibility works. What reassurance and advice can the Cabinet Secretary give Fraserburgh Harbour, and will she meet with myself and the Harbour Board to discuss further?
Cabinet Secretary.
So Karen Adam is a strong champion of Fraserburgh Harbour, and I met the board with her previously. Of course, it is an independent trust port, and it is important to reiterate the discussion taking place between Scottish Enterprise and Fraserburgh Harbour around that master plan and the economic opportunities, including what new port infrastructure might be required to support these economic prospects. So that's included Scottish Enterprise engaging with the port's consultants to provide input on key market opportunities. A meeting with relevant ministers can be considered at an appropriate stage, but I would advise that it may be more appropriate for economy, marine or energy ministers as portfolio leads, depending on potential funding sources, when it's finally suggested what funding is best pursued.
Brief supplementary, Liam Kerr.
Thank you. It's crucial for its master plan that Fraserburgh Harbour can leverage private finance, and that will be made far easier with the Government's full support. So will the Minister confirm her Government's unequivocal support for Fraserburgh Harbour master plan and promise to do all she can to back it?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I've heard first-hand about the master plan. I am enthusiastic as the Transport Cabinet Secretary of what their vision and ambition is. You will be aware that there's £150 million in offshore development support, which particularly is, if you recognise, that's a tripling of the funding that's available. So in terms of that decision-making about the economic aspects of the master plan, that wouldn't necessarily lie in my portfolio, but I was very enthused and impressed when I met those that Harbour Board, who, remember, are voluntary individuals in that trust support, and I think they're doing a fine job.
Question number 6, Fulton McGregor.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what recent discussions it has had with Transport Scotland regarding safety measures at the Showhead flyover on the A725 in Coatbridge.
Cabinet Secretary.
As Government Minister, I've had no specific discussions regarding Shorehead flyover with the Scottish Government's transport agency, Transport Scotland. However, I am aware that officials from Transport Scotland and their maintenance contractor are in dialogue with Mr McGregor as the local constituency MSP regarding the operation and safety performance of a nearby signalised junction and potential remediation or action.
To McGregor.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that response. She will be aware that this road is unfortunately a hotspot for accidents and has been a major concern for many of my constituents. As she said, I know she's also aware that I've had several and ongoing meetings with Transport Scotland, the Scottish Roads Partnership, AME, amongst others, regarding improvements at the junction. I have to say Transport Scotland and the other agencies mentioned have been excellent at communicating with me and been open to improvements, and I'm pleased that at the most recent meeting it was agreed further reviews were going to take place around implementation of a filter lane at one of the junctions and further discussions with Safety Camera Scotland following the results of a recent red light survey. Can I therefore ask the Cabinet Secretary what the Government can do to support the transport agencies to ensure any required improvements are undertaken as soon as possible?
Cabinet Secretary.
So I will ask officials at Transport Scotland to conclude the review work as soon as possible and prioritise any recommendations for early delivery. And can I recognise Mr McGregor as the constituency MSP for being a persistent and effective representative for his constituents in pursuing this very important issue for them.
Question number 7, Elena Whittam.
To ask the Scottish Government how it is supporting the public and private sector to develop carbon literacy skills.
Minister Alistair Allen.
Promoting carbon literacy is essential to achieving net zero. That's why, through the work of our enterprise agencies and Business Energy Scotland, we have ensured support and guidance is available to help businesses understand and reduce their carbon emissions while aiding climate resilience. It's also why we are committed to working in partnership with public bodies, including through the Sustainable Scotland Network, to help them fulfil their climate change duties and demonstrate climate leadership. As part of this, we are currently drafting new statutory guidance that will improve climate literacy across the public sector.
Elena Whittam.
Scotland was one of the first countries in the world to acknowledge that we face a climate emergency. Does the Minister agree with me that it's crucial that we take every step possible to ensure we support the upskilling of businesses and organisations to inspire changes in behaviour, to improve our environment, the quality of people's lives and well-being, and the places that they care for, such as the carbon literacy courses delivered by 2045, the way forward in my constituency?
Minister.
I agree wholeheartedly with the member about the need to support the upskilling of businesses and organisations across our economy. That is vital if we are to deliver the changes needed for net zero and if we are to realise the very significant benefits of adopting more efficient, sustainable practices. As I have said, the Scottish Government continues to provide support for carbon literacy through our enterprise agencies and our work across the public sector. But of course we also need to see action from out with government, and that's why I welcome the efforts of businesses, like one highlighted by the member herself, the Way Forward 2045, which I know Elena Whittam has mentioned in parliamentary motions. I know in the past year that particular business was shortlisted for a Vibes Scottish Environmental Business Award in the Just Transition category. So that kind of recognition is a further way in which we are encouraging positive change and greater carbon literacy across our economy.
Thank you. And a concise question 8, Michelle Thompson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what its response is to reports at Falkirk Council is to consider a motion calling for immediate action by the Scottish Government to support the Grangemouth chemical cluster and the future of its industry.
Minister Alistair Allen.
I recognise the criticality of the Grangemouth cluster and its contribution to Scotland's economy. We are committed to playing our part to secure a sustainable and long-term future for the complex. We have jointly funded the Project Willow study that seeks to develop a set of commercial propositions for the site. We have also committed £50 million to the Falkirk and Grangemouth growth deal. I am also working closely with Scottish Enterprise and SDI to identify and work with partners with an interest in investing in the cluster. Within the draft budget, there is also £8.75 million directly attributed to Grangemouth, and I am committed to working with industry and the community through the Grangemouth Future Industries Board to identify interventions and projects that maximise outcomes. I also call on the UK Government to go further and to ensure that they leave no stone unturned in achieving our shared ambitions for Grangemouth.
Bill Thompson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I thank the Minister for that answer. I can confirm that a motion has been lodged today by the SNP Group, and critically, they are calling for the Grangemouth Future Industry Board to expand its scope to focus on the here and now. Ministers, the workers in Grangemouth don't just want jam tomorrow, they want bread and butter today. So is the Scottish Government hearing the call for real action to protect the skills base and the vital chemical cluster? The UK Government is doing nothing. I implore the Scottish Government to do as much as they possibly can.
Minister.
Well, a number of the interventions I've just mentioned are very much about the here and now, and Falkirk Council's motion and indeed Michelle Thompson have highlighted the tension at the heart of all that the partners are doing here to ensure that Grangemouth has a key role to play in Scotland's net zero future. But to do that, it also needs to have, as the member says, a here and now. So that was very disappointing. It was very disappointing to hear nothing at all from the Chancellor yesterday, not a single commitment or comment which would either help avoid an abrupt and unnecessary closure of the refinery or support Grangemouth's transition to play its part in Scotland's green economy. We need all the partners on the Grangemouth Future Industry Board to be working together constructively and with real urgency to do all they can once Project Willow reports to progress its recommendations, as many of these recommendations will fall to the UK Government to use its reserve powers to take forward. And as the UK Government co-chairs the board, we will need this Labour Government to do what it has said it would do.